Hello everybody, I'm Senator Bill Cassidy representing the great state of Louisiana. I was supposed to be with you in person, but I cannot be. I apologize. I'm flying back from Israel. As you look at this video, it goes without saying why this trip to New York was interrupted for a trip to Israel. But I thank you for what you're doing. The folks there at Columbia have been very influential in my understanding of how do we address rising sea levels, if you will. That's my perspective from Louisiana, as a result of increased concentrations of CO2 in the atmosphere. My state is probably the most carbon-intensive state per capita in the nation, producing all the essentials of fuel and plastics and chemicals required for modernity. On the other hand, my state is also the one most affected by sea level rises. Because of relative sea level rises, my state has lost land mass equivalent to the entire state of Delaware. So we are on both sides of this issue. We understand the importance of carbon producing, of a carbon production type economy for modernity, and yet we have also had the greatest problems with that elevated rising sea level. So where do we go from here? Well, first, we got to be realist. For those people that think that we are never going to use fossil fuel again, that is absurd. It is not going to happen. We should just put it to the side. If we're going to make progress, we have to be rational. Who influences my thinking on this? The folks there at Columbia. A few years ago, the woman working with me on climate issues attended a conference there at Columbia, and someone said, we in the West, or in the developed world, cannot expect the developing world to not use energy in the cheapest, most readily available form that it comes in order to climb out of poverty. This has been, in the years since I have seen this, I have seen the reality of this. China has just produced a record amount of coal. You could say the same thing for Indonesia. And throughout the developing world, fossil fuel is fueling economic development. I just read a quote from a leader in Africa speaking about why should his nation turn its back on those readily available fossil fuel resources when those would be essential to elevate his country out of poverty. So, if we accept that it's a reality, that fossil fuel is going to be with us for quite some time, then we need to have strategies as to how we decrease its use. In the West, we're doing a pretty good job. We all know in the United States our absolute amount of carbon being produced by our economy is lower now than it was in 2005. Despite a substantially larger economy, population, and by the way, amount of domestic CO2 and domestic oil and natural gas production. So how do we address this? Well, of course, we need to limit our emissions as much as possible. From my perspective, we should build out nuclear energy. That's why I voted in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act for a huge development in small modular nuclear reactors and other forms of nuclear energy. We need to continue to build out our renewables. I'm a big believer in renewables. To the degree that the expense and the intermittency of renewables still can work in a developing country, we would hope that they would and should incentivize renewables deployment there as well. But we also have to recognize that fossil fuel will be with us. What can we do about it? Well, paradoxically, development of cheap natural gas, which then displaces coal, is a way for worldwide reduction of CO2 emissions, and we've seen that here in the United States. I'm going to be introducing legislation for a foreign pollution fee, my version, if you will, of a carbon border adjustment mechanism, and the goal being that we would partner with other nations which have such a foreign pollution fee carbon border adjustment mechanism in order to come up with some sort of coalition, international coalition, that would encourage developing countries to lower their carbon emissions if they wish to import into our international coalition. And now let me come to direct air capture. Direct air capture is a way, in an extraterritorial fashion, for the developing world to reach beyond its borders and to pull carbon out of the atmosphere, carbon which in a sense has been produced in another country. Direct air capture is not the only answer. It's a marginal answer. But everything that we're speaking of is a marginal answer. Once you recognize the reality that fossil fuel will be used in some form for decades to come, we need that sort of extraterritorial way in which to do so. Now in Louisiana, I have a particular interest. There was, again, somebody from Columbia testifying before the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, upon which I serve in Congress, in the Senate, a few years ago, in which he said that Louisiana, my state, is the Saudi Arabia for the ability to sequester carbon. So that perked my ears. And in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, as we were negotiating, I made it clear, I made it kind of okay. We want to get this set up so that Louisiana would compete well. Not just because I'm from Louisiana, but because, as I was told, we're the Saudi Arabia of the ability to sequester. But it's more than that. We also have the ecosystem by which direct air capture can be part of. To be specific about this, the Department of Energy recently awarded Louisiana one of the sites for a direct air capture outfit. And the appeal of it was that Louisiana had, independently of this, already been developing an ability to sequester carbon. Now, this site to sequester carbon would be to serve the carbon-intensive energy, carbon-intensive petrochemical plants nearby, but obviously it then fits in well with direct air capture. So we are within an ecosystem where direct air capture can be added as a marginal contributor to the CO2 coming from quote-unquote smokestack industry. And so in this way, we think it's optimizing the, how to put it, the business model for direct air capture. At some point, it has to survive without the $600 million that came from the Department of Energy, and it's going to do so if the business model works. But the business model, in one sense, must work, because the only way that we in the developed world will be able to lower carbon content that is produced from all the fossil fuel used in other countries, specifically developing countries, is if we do direct air capture here. Now, I will say long term, there has to be a business model that works not just in Louisiana, but elsewhere if direct air capture is going to go to scale. That's why I'm introducing several pieces of legislation, and I will discuss them first. I've already mentioned the foreign pollution fee, which we think will encourage lower carbon intensity production of goods throughout the world. Secondly, we also are going to do legislation to streamline permitting. Whether you are talking about a pipeline or a power line, right now it takes too long to get done, and we are going to be introducing legislation to address that. And then we're putting in the CCUS Parity Act. That will allow parity of how the 45Q tax credit is applied, not just where it now is, but also to direct air capture. And then our hope is, not only will that 45Q encourage the increased sequestration of a direct air capture project here in the States, but it also emphasizes its application for the utilization of carbon. Ultimately, technology is the closest thing to a free lunch we can have. And if we find that by utilization of carbon, we can create other products, not only will that reduce the initial carbon that has to be brought out of the ground in order to develop whatever product we're now producing, but it finds a better business model for direct air capture. Let me say this differently. If we can emphasize the utilization of the carbon that is extracted from the atmosphere, and it gives a way to use that money to make money, to use that carbon to make money, to otherwise support the business model of direct air capture, then we have something which can be exported not just across the United States, but across the world. So, in a variety of ways, I see the future of direct air capture helping now, in again, pulling carbon in an extraterritorial fashion, but also a solution for the future. If we can find how to utilize that carbon, then we have a technology that other countries will adopt, and will be on our way to more peacefully coexisting with the inevitable use of carbon that will occur. Thanks for allowing me to be part of your conference. I really appreciate the work that you've done. It's obviously influenced me, and hopefully has allowed me to better influence our public policy. Thank you.